Hello everyone and welcome to Bash Course Quarantined U.S. History. My name is Faith and today we are going to talk about the Civil War. So the Southern states have now formed an association called the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as its president. In South Carolina in 1861, a little military fort called Fort Sumter was cut off from the rest of the Union. When Union President Abraham Lincoln tries to send supplies, South Carolina attacks. Within 2 days, the fort is captured. And Lincoln responds by using executive power to raise a volunteer army, spend money, and suspend the writ of habeas corpus. The Civil War has now truly begun. A key issue for Lincoln was to maintain control of the border states, which he succeeded in. In Maryland, this meant declaring martial law to stop attacks on troops and railroads. Lincoln used forces to keep control of Missouri and Kentucky as well. In 1861, the Morrill Tariff Act was passed, which increased tariffs to help industry. Industry was a big factor in the differences between the North and the South. While the South had much of the country's agriculture, the North had a much larger population, and 85% of the factories and 70% of the railroads. In July of 1861, one of the first major battles of the Civil War occurred, at heavy losses to the Union. Known as the Battle of Bull Run, or Manassas to the Confederates, this began as a large Union drive from Washington, D.C., to Manassas. Initially successful, a counterattack by Stonewall Jackson led to a quick retreat for the Union forces. Involved in this battle, and sharing a striking resemblance to a basis teacher, was Brigadier General Andrew Porter. Shout out Dr. Green. At this point, the Union strategy had three main points devised by Winfield Scott. 1. The Anaconda Plan, a choking naval blockade. 2. Control of the Mississippi River. And 3. The capturing of Richmond. The Confederacy was the main producer of cotton worldwide. They needed to keep being able to sell their products, and wanted their foreign purchasers to support them in the war effort. Thus, they sent diplomats to Great Britain. However, the emissary's ship was intercepted by the Union and the men taken as prisoners of war. Though Great Britain's threat of war made Lincoln release them, the envoys were unsuccessful in their bid for British support. This was known as the Trent Affair. Another legal matter that occurred in 1861 was the Confiscation Acts, because the Union General Benjamin Butler, shout out Ben Butler, refused to return captured slaves. These acts decided that enemy property being used against the Union could be seized, and that any slave seized would be freed and were also subject to the draft. In 1862, General George McClellan undertook what he called the Peninsula Campaign, where he tried to invade Virginia. He was repulsed by Confederate General Robert E. Lee and retreated. For his failure, he was replaced by General John Pope. Pope, however, did not fare much better. At the Second Battle of Bull Run, he was driven back to Washington, D.C. by Lee. Lee followed the success with a drive into Maryland in September, hoping to demonstrate his strength and assure British support. However, a reinstated McClellan intercepted him, forcing a retreat to Virginia. McClellan, somewhat inexplicably, decided not to pursue him and was permanently removed. Because of this battle, called the Battle of Antietam, the Confederacy lost British support. Another replacement for McClellan, one Ambrose Burnside, led the opposite way from the cautious McClellan and led more reckless attacks. He was punished for this by Lee at the Battle of Fredericksburg in December of 1862. Burnside's tactics of heroic charges, etc., were quite ineffective against entrenchments. During the same year, the Homestead Act and Morrill Land Grant Act helped settle the West with land grants and technical colleges. And the Pacific Railway Act extended a transcontinental railroad to the West Coast. The better economic organization and sources of funding for the war effort that the North had made these improvements possible. The Battle of Shiloh was a large and devastating battle for Union control of the Mississippi, led by one Major General Ulysses S. Grant, who would become very important later on. Grant was attacked by Confederate forces on the Tennessee River and was nearly overwhelmed by their numbers, but held on until reinforcements arrived, and the Union was able to push through the Confederate lines. This battle helped establish Grant as a strong and capable leader. While all these battles were happening on land, another was taking place at sea, the Monitor versus the Merrimac, called the Virginia by the Southerners. These were the first ironclad ships to be invented and marked a great turning point in military technology, as they were much stronger than wooden tall ships. The Monitor was the Union's ironclad, and the battle resulted in a draw. Also in 1862, David Farragut's navy captured New Orleans, essentially securing the Mississippi River for the Union and cutting off the western part of the Confederacy, accomplishing the second point of Winfield Scott's strategy. In September, the President issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which decreed that on New Year's Day, 1863, thenceforward, all slaves in rebelling states would be set free. General Grant was still in Mississippi come May of 1863. He laid siege to Vicksburg on May 18th and held it all the way to July 3rd when Confederate General Pemberton asked to negotiate terms of peace. Meanwhile, General Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia were heading back up into Maryland for the second time, hoping to bring a quick end to the war and hoping that it wouldn't end like Antietam. General Hooker of the Army of the Potomac followed them, staying between them and Washington, D.C. They met in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
On June 28th, Hooker was replaced by General Gordon Meade. For the first couple days of July, the two armies engaged here at Gettysburg. Lee, due to misinformation from cavalry and scouts, made several critical mistakes. Many died here at Gettysburg, and it was a turning point in the war as it stopped the Second Northern Invasion. But another reason we remember it so well is because of a 200-some word oration given 4 months later in November. 76 years ago, Abraham Lincoln stood on this very spot delivering his famous Gettysburg Address. In November of 1863, he delivered this speech to bring motivation to the troops because the war was not yet over, and he wanted to commemorate how important the sacrifice of soldiers of the armies were who fought on this land. And so it became the cemetery. But the important thing that he emphasized most was that America's government is a government of the people, by the people, for the people.
All right, enough about Gettysburg. In March of the following year, Lincoln made Grant General-in-Chief of the Union Army. In early November, Lincoln won election for his second term. He beat McClellan, that former general, 22 states to 3. Major General Sherman, 7 days later, began what would be known as Shermans March. He took his troops and marched from Atlanta, Georgia, all the way to the port city of Savannah. They destroyed all military targets and industry along their way, a policy that was known as scorched earth. In March of 1865, President Lincoln gave his second inaugural address. It, along with the Gettysburg Address, are inscribed in the Lincoln Memorial. 41 days later, he would be shot and killed at Ford's Theater by John Wilkes Booth. 5 days before Lincoln's assassination, the final battle of the Civil War occurred in Appomattox, Virginia. General Robert E. Lee eventually surrendered the same day. General Ulysses S. Grant signed the treaty that would end the war. So there you have it, the Civil War from beginning to end. Thank you for watching Bash Course Quarantine, and we'll see you next time. Stay out of school, kids. The Bash Course Quarantine team is Sandro Ansari, Sam Mencimer, Eamon, Pasha, Ishaq, Sarah Orozco, and myself. Please put any questions you have in the comments below, and we'll do our best to answer them or find someone who can. Thank you for watching Bash Course, and as they say in my hometown, oh my EOSH.